So how does one describe the roller coaster of story, emotions, and quality that is Season 1 of The Owl House? Well, it started out kind of... Then it became... But after that it was much more... Then later it was all... Oh, yeah. And by the end it was pretty much... Woo-hoo-hoo, yeah! Eat out of 10, would which again, hashtag Lumity for life, hashtag Hootie for president. Alright, for real though, Season 1 of The Owl House stands as the perfect example of the rewards that can be reaped when you give a show a chance. I'll admit that my first impressions of The Owl House were not all that favorable. I wasn't frustrated or violently repulsed or anything, I was just really underwhelmed. Like, alright, this protagonist exists. This writing exists. Yeah, this show definitely exists. I'm not really feeling the hype though. I haven't transcended this plane of existence or anything. What am I missing here? Well, it turns out what I was missing was the rest of the season, because much like Loose, this show was just a late bloomer. And bloom it did. Everything greatly improved as time went on. They took the simplistic and overbearing message about how weird is the only way, viva la revolution, and replaced them with surprisingly deep and realistic depictions of individuality and conformity in modern day society. They show the consequences of going too far with one of the two extremes, while at the same time emphasizing the importance of finding a balance, using one's unique blend of creativity and the systems that conformity provide to find a true calling. Many success stories in real life come from this way of thinking. If you look at content creation, which is something I may be a little bit familiar with, it involves people utilizing their talents with a passionate outlook on things, while at the same time understanding the pre-established systems in society and using them to their advantage. Audiences, demographics, popular trends, etc., while still adding their own clever spin or personality to what they make to stand out from the crowd. Even Luce's journey to learn spells can be seen as a balance, since she discovers a pre-established system of magic through intense passion and outside-the-norm creative thinking. I haven't seen a balanced message put this perfectly since the Lego Movie, and if I'm comparing something to the Lego Movie, then you know, this is pretty good. Multiple characters went from fitting into their stereotypical molds to smashing those molds with a cast iron fist. Willow started as a typical shy, clumsy, nerdy girl, but after fully embracing her true talents and individuality, she transformed into a powerful, popular, take-charge boss. A perfect example of what I mentioned before, utilizing the talents you know you have, but still using conformist resources to your advantage, in this case, school. Also, a girl that becomes popular by being kind, helpful, and an all-around good person to others? Wow, what a concept! Seriously though, being nice will get you way further in life than just being a snooty, vain alpha woman, and I'm glad this show presents that. Bump started as a basic, by-the-books, threatening authority figure, but with time we see that he can be fair, just, reasonable, willing to admit mistakes, and very protective of his students. Some people might think otherwise since his school probably files more accident cases than Hogwarts, but to him, Hexside is a controlled environment. Despite death coming to the door more times than a desperate Girl Scout, Bump knows the school inside and out, and likely has safety nets in place for all the potential dangers that come with running it. Heck, he even showed a student in peril in his freaking commercial, no shame. So he likely thinks that everyone is perfectly safe under his control, even if it doesn't seem like it at first. But when something out of his control comes along, something unexpected, like the basilisk in First Day, he jumps right in front to keep his students safe, because that's something he's not used to and has no plan for, so he sees that as dangerous. So in a very weird way, his mentality actually makes sense. Also, seeing him trying to raise the roof is adorable. Aww. And of course, you can't talk about characters without mentioning the precious gay tomato baby that deserves all the hugs, codename Amity Blight. I heard word from a few people that they don't like Amity because instead of flipping her archetype, she just follows it. The classic rival turned friend turned partner cliche. But to simply judge her by that alone is to ignore all the good stuff. An archetype by itself is merely the skeleton or vessel for a character, something to build on. And for the short amount of time this season had, they sure did a lot of construction. The emotion-packed voice acting, the clever writing, the cute-as-a-button facial expressions all come together to make a character I really grew to care for. I love seeing her strong alpha female tendencies go from tearing others down to defending those she cares about. I love seeing her get a taste of true friendship after years and years of manufactured relationships, showing off her vulnerable humanity. I even love that freaking hair. Her parents apparently dyed it green so all their kids would be color-coded, but she left a tiny little bit of the original color to show that the true Amity will one day peek through and maybe stick it to her parents. I can't wait to see that. As for Luce, oh man, this girl didn't just get a splash of reality, she dove headfirst into the reality public pool. She went from treating the Boiling Isles like her own personal hero fantasy to getting a better grip on the reality of the situation she's in. This new world is no storybook. It's got all manner of societal struggles, tragic circumstances, and deceitful individuals that will do whatever they can to move up in life. It's very much a splitting image of the real world. It just happens to have monsters, demons, magic spells, and ice cream cones that can swallow you whole. In an ironic twist, the protagonist learns her lesson of becoming a more grounded person in a freaking fantasy world. That alone is pretty hilarious. She slowly begins to accept reality episode by episode, stops treating her Good Witch Azura books as some kind of sacred texts, and becomes a much more interesting character while still keeping her quirky tendencies. And while I felt like they were pushing her way too much as the relatable weird girl in the first few episodes, she eventually found her way into my heart and slowly grew on me, like an adorable wide-eyed fungus with a dark side. And of course, the aspects that were always awesome only got more awesome. Ida continues to be the best foxy magic hobo on television, but the effect that Luce has had on her life has really made itself known, taming this wild witch and giving her a taste of what it's like to be a mama, with all the adorable moments that you would expect. King is beginning to realize that there's more to life than just gaining power, as his unbreakable friendship with Luce demonstrates. He's growing a lot in character, just not in size. Sorry, little buddy. The comedy's still solid, the world is still interesting, the emotions still hit really hard, and Hootie is still my everything. From what I've seen so far, the Owl House went from an okay show with good ideas and decent potential to a great show that explores new and interesting territory with every new entry. It's not a perfect experience, as I could point out certain overdone ideas, plot contrivances, pacing issues, and inconsistencies, but the overall experience definitely has more positives to offer than negatives, and if the creators play their cards right, Season 2 can only go uphill from here. But before we start thinking about the future, cause trust me, I've got a lot to think about, let's focus on the here and now. The first 19 episodes, and all the laughs, feels, and developments that came along with them. Let's do it! 10 words or less, ranking from 1 to 10. Leave your own list in the comments below. Thanks to Jello Apocalypse, all that good stuff. Let's see which episodes are truly the most magical, cause it's time for every episode of the Owl House Season 1 reviewed in 10 words or less. Who would there be Nope, wait a minute. Is it? Okay, there we go. Let there be light! I'm weird. It's good to be weird. We get it. I'll have the fried squid trickster with extra fantasy cheese. The premiere of everyone's favorite character, the school bell. There's a circle of light, and King gets more developed. Yeah, we seal away your individuality, but free pens? Huh? I've got moonlight powers and legs for days. Hoot hoot! True friendships require time. This episode taught that. It's sublime. Body swap, generic body swap. Boom, 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 boom. Gus's plot is but Edith's plot gives me life. If we don't get more Bat Queen, I'm gonna squeak. Luce and King almost die of writer's block. The true antagonist? That wants battery life. Studying every subject in your school, always a good idea. Also, why does Luce already have her track colors before she takes the entrance exam? That's bothering me. Episodes with these two are one of life's small pleasures. Emotional, adorable, and that photo class is a terrible idea. Luce overcame her fears and then she danced with Amity. Sports! And gay panic, but mostly sports. That escalated extremely quickly, and I absolutely love it. Really rushed, but hey, still hyped for Season 2. And just because the season is shorter than most, here's a little bonus. All the Owl Pellet shorts reviewed in 5 words or less. Hexside School. He's probably fine. Luce paints my self-doubts. Hooty is hilarious, as usual. That egg was really hammy. And last but not least, let's cap things off with the top 3 and bottom 3 of the season. Which one spelled out success for the show, and which one spelled out other things? Let's find out. Number 3 worst. I was a teenage abomination. I don't know, that's a little harsh. You're not really an abomination, you're just incredibly boring. Yeah, I can't give this one too much flack because, you know, it's only the 3rd episode and there's a lot to establish, but the entire thing plays out so much like a paint-by-numbers school drama. And when it's not being predictable, it's missing some big opportunities. We've got a nerdy underdog who's constantly bullied and put down by the popular mean girl. A scheme set up to put them in their place, which works for a little while, but then the jig is up when the principal gets involved, and they're forced to tell the truth. It might sound like I'm lowballing the characters a lot, but remember, this is before their excellent development. In their first episode, they just strike me as basic school stereotypes. The popular mean girl, the looming principal, the nerdy shy girl who's actually really talented and or powerful, the comic relief best friend, and barely any extra spice beyond that. Again, I know this is their first appearance, but to be honest, there are Owl House characters that made awesome first impressions in their premieres. Ida and King were great in the first try, Lilith was great in the first try, Bat Queen was great in the first try, but aside from some bits and pieces, the Hexside student body is just an unimpressive pile of mush. Even Hexside School itself just seems like your basic fantasy school at first. No iconic locations, no standout designs, mostly just generic classrooms and hallways.
Hallways, hallways, always, hallways.
There are a few cool things like sentient lockers, humanoid mucks, and Grunkle Stan as a school bell, but if you're expecting a Hogwarts situation where you're immediately sucked into this grand and amazing school of magic, don't get your hopes up. At least, not until later. And when the episode's not being predictable, it's being kinda confusing. I mean, you're telling me that the Abominations professor couldn't tell that this thing is not an abomination? I get that they come in all shapes and sizes, but there are bits of her skin showing. And even if you can't tell that it's a human specifically, it's got the same build and skin as a regular student. The only real difference is the round ears. And you can't tell me that no one has ever tried to pull this kind of stunt before. Also, do Willow and Gus face any kinds of consequences for what they did in this episode? I mean, lying, cheating, damaging school property, turning the campus into a Vine compilation? Considering that later Gus goes to detention for pulling the fire alarm, and Luce goes to detention for touching an Oracle Orb for like 5 seconds, the fact that Gus and Willow don't seem to face any penalties here is really bizarre to me. And speaking of Willow, why did she have to make this gigantic wall of plants just to block off one abomination? I mean, you one-shot a bunch of these guys by just vine whipping them, so isn't this a little excessive? It's not a problem with the episode, I just thought it was kind of funny. It's like using a grenade to kill a mosquito. I'll admit, I did enjoy King and Ida's subplot, but I feel like there was great potential that was sorely missed here. It involves a bed where they try to prove who's the superior leader. Ida's forced to wait for Luce to return, getting more and more uncertain as time passes, and King has to train a trash slug to be his minion, which he tries to do by constantly feeding it treats. On paper, this actually sounds like a great idea, teaching a lesson about the common pitfalls that teachers fall into, like way too much positive reinforcement and not giving your students the attention and effort they need. And at first, I thought this was going to be the lesson of the day and both characters were going to learn something. But they don't really focus on that idea. They just kind of say, I guess Ida was a good teacher after all. Even though she's not. She's really not. And this would have been a good chance for her to learn something about that. But, for what the subplot is, it's still alright. Also, feeding King Slug a bunch of salt just shrinks it down to baby size while the slug in the beginning died from salt intake? Kinda weird. Again, I understand that the purpose of this episode is to establish Hexside and its inhabitants for better adventures later on. But as a standalone episode, there's no reason to go back to this one. It's like laying a concrete foundation for a building. It's important in the long run, but you're not going to want to sit there and admire it as much as the beautiful structure built on top of it. And while the episode is serviceable, it never really reaches beyond that. Boring episode? Coward. Number 3 best, Convention. Making cuts for this list was really painful. I had to choose between 3 masterpieces for my number 3 spot, and I'm still not sure if I made the right decision. But in the end, I decided to go with this one. The first episode which convinced me to keep tabs on this series. It's a jack of all trades when it comes to Owl House's good qualities, and is without question the best of the first 10 episodes. It starts off simple enough with Luce, Ida, King, Willow, and Gus all attending this annual job fair for witches known as the Convention. I would have called it Coven Con, but alright. And what follows is, well, a little bit of everything. There's some intriguing and immersive world building, and also literal building, in the form of the Coven system. I mentioned how this system is similar to how labor unions work in real life, and I still think that holds up pretty well. You get acceptance and camaraderie among your fellow workers, as well as ways to speak to the higher-ups, but at the cost of exclusive loyalty to one workforce, or magic type in this case. And if you refuse to join one, you basically get blocked off from 99% of job opportunities. And in the case of the Owl House, you also become public enemy number 1. The closer you look, the more you realize just how right Ida was. This is a pretty crooked system. Isolating one's blossoming potential to a single category is kinda messed up, and in the long run, it can be really damaging. I can say from experience that people have doubts and second guesses about their life choices every single day. So forcing someone to make this kind of decision very early in their lives, with no proof that it can be changed or undone, is bound to mess a lot of people up. It's a pretty potent example of what can happen when conformity is taken to its greatest extreme. Like, alright kid, chop chop, no time to learn your name, we need more cogs in our machine, so what's it gonna be? You wanna grow flowers, or sculpt indentured servants, or what? Hurry up, we're on the clock here. And that's not all. When we're first told of the mighty Emperor Belos at the end of the episode, it adds some intriguing mystery as to what his endgame is with this whole system. Is it simply just organization of the kingdom for ease of rule? Is it a pyramid scheme to ensure that no one challenges his reign? Because if someone tried to overthrow him, he'd have tabs on everyone's magical limitations.
Or could it be something bigger entirely? Something much, much bigger?
Well, we've got a better idea now, obviously, with more episodes that have aired, but when this first came out, it was a nice way to hype us up for what's to come. But I think the biggest draw of this episode, and most episodes for that matter, is how the characters are handled. Ida continues to be the best thing about this show, not only coming packed with the best humor in the episode, but also having more scraps of her backstory revealed. In the last episode, we got the origins of her name and the curse she bears, while here we get a better understanding of her criminal status, and easily the best part, the reveal of her sister Lilith. The introduction of Lilith was pretty much perfect. On the surface, she's the antithesis of Ida in terms of style, demeanor, strategy, and life choices. But their polar opposite personalities don't change the fact that they are, and always will be, sisters. And this comes out in plenty of their interactions, including Lilith holding her fire when Ida mentions that her curse is worsening, and this amazing scene of Ida taunting Lilith when it's revealed that she cheated during the witches' duel too, with all the victory dances and na that you would expect. And dare I mention the magic duel between the two of them near the end? Not only is the animation a freaking feast, but it perfectly shows without words the dynamic between these two sisters. Lilith is very calculated and precise, being laser focused on the fight and using a perfect balance of attack, defense, and evasive techniques. Meanwhile, Ida is wild and cocky, with a constant smug smile on her face as she launches powerful spell after powerful spell. She knows she's all that in a bag of Hex Mix, and no one is going to tell her otherwise. She even resorts to childish tactics at some point, like commanding Albert to pull on Lilith's hair so she can land the final blow. Just everything about this fight is spectacular, and the fact that we got to know both characters beforehand just makes it all the more engaging. I could just go on and on about this one. Luce and Amity's first big interactions, which set up their further development and relationship later on. King's silly side story, which actually ties into the main plot near the end. The colorful, fun setting of the convention center. And the way the events just perfectly flow one into another like a series of rivers. It's like an actual convention. There's so many panels and activities that it can get kinda overwhelming at times. Basically, this episode is everything that Teenage Abomination wasn't. Unique and immersive setting, rock-solid comedy, eventful story, and characters that are engaging from their first appearance onward. And ironically enough, that episode took place at school, which is never fun, and this one takes place at a convention, which are tons of fun. So in that case, I guess this one being better was just fate. 'Twas foretold in the cards, as they say. And speaking of the cards, you want to join my channel's coven? You just gotta hit the red button. We've got all you need. Pamphlets, vouchers, those free little trinkets that you shove in a drawer and forget about when you get home. It's all free. no, wait, don't all of you leave. I've got cake. I had cake. Number 2 worst, Once Upon a Swap. If there was one thing that Owl House really succeeds at besides, well, everything, it would be the subversion of tropes. Ida being a 180 of the wise magical mentor, the main character becoming a more grounded person in a fantasy world, even specific episodes like Witches Before Wizards, which constantly make fun of the typical Chosen One stories. So having an episode where they use the age-old plot of body swapping, in their hands, I was excited to see how they'd handle this.
But that was a long time ago.
My problem isn't that this episode is particularly bad or anything, it's just nothing. It's so much of a non-entity that it's barely worth even revisiting for pleasure. I didn't even want to revisit it that much for this review, but I did it anyway, so let's check it out. If you know the basic premise of a body swap, it's when two characters switch bodies, either by accident or on purpose, usually to learn a life lesson about each other, or how hard the other's life is Freaky Friday style. Heck, they even reference Freaky Friday in this episode. And to be fair, there are a lot of fun things you can do with a body swap episode. You could subvert expectations like in Fairly Odd Parents, you can further the characters' relationships like in Teen Titans, heck, you can play the tropes entirely straight but just make it really freaking funny like in Futurama. But Owl House doesn't do any of those things. The story is split up into 3 parts, with Luce in Ida's body, Ida in King's body, and King in Luce's body. And all 3 stories play out in the exact same way. They test the waters with their new body, things start off great at first, they anger or provoke someone, that someone chases them until they suddenly realize how hard the other person's life is, and with all 3 of them crossing paths and changing back, end of episode. It's 100% predictable, with no twists, turns, subversions, nothing at all. And this would be fine if they were more self-aware about it, but aside from the Freaky Friday reference and the rushed moral at the end, they play everything so straight and by the books that there's no ironic fun to be had here. But like I said, that would be perfectly fine if they just used the tropes as a platform to tell jokes or create memorable scenarios. And aside from like 2 or 3 moments, almost nothing here is all that memorable or funny. They have some Penstagram jokes with Basha that are just cringy, King calling the teen demographic different names got old after a while, moments like Elf Rage were a lot more weird than they were funny, and all around I was mostly just bored. I'll admit that Hooty got a laugh out of me during his scenes, cause let's face it, Hooty is never not funny. And I did get a chuckle out of Luce's mugshot here. She just looks so defeated, poor baby. But bottom line, I shouldn't be able to count the amount of good parts on one hand. If you're gonna have a premise this overdone, you need to fill in the empty space with something to keep people satisfied, and they really didn't. And if that wasn't bad enough, this episode in the long run is entirely pointless. No characters are furthered, no major story or world details are fleshed out, again, nothing. If anything, all this premise does is leave you asking questions. I mean, apparently the spell that Ida uses allows people to swap bodies, and yet their voices and their faces also swap. The voices I don't mind because that's a trope as old as time, to help kids remember who's who. Even the good body swap episodes do that. But when you pair it with the faces as well, it makes a lot of these scenarios really hard to buy. Ida and the grandmas is fine because we've never seen these two before and they have no idea who King is. King and the teens is a lot weirder though because they saw and heard Luce just a few minutes before the swap. And now she's got yellow eyes and a male voice? But teens can be forgetful sometimes, so alright. But Lilith is where I draw the line. Considering she can spot her sister in a crowd and would definitely know her face and voice, especially from just 3 episodes ago, how can she not tell that something is wrong with Ida? Luce even straight up says, "You're Ida's sister," and even forgets her name. Also, why does the spell make the 3 of them switch clothes when they go back to their normal bodies? Also, how come when Ida body swaps the crowd of people, their voices change but their faces remain the same? Does this spell have any kind of consistency? Also, if this kitty cafe is so against teens, why are the only no teens allowed signs on the inside of the door and the inside of the shop? Shouldn't there be one on the outside or at least in the window so the teens know not to come in? Also, why aren't teens allowed at a kitty cafe? Teen girls would be the perfect demographic for this kind of place. They love cute animals. Plus their Penstagram posts would be perfect for business. Also,
We'll be right back after this long list of problems. Back to the show. I think you get the idea.
I couldn't go any lower than a 4 because, yeah, humor's subjective, plus this is a kid's show and they probably won't be as accustomed to these tropes as I am. But even then, there are countless better body swap episodes and life swap episodes that they could be watching, which are way more entertaining than this. In the end, especially when compared to Owl House's other masterpieces, this episode is just a massive serving of nothing. It's like getting served a 3-course dinner of air at a restaurant, and you just have to sit there for 22 minutes while your stomach yells at you. If you want a fun and enjoyable filler episode, go check out Sense and Insensitivity or Really Small Problems. They're not the most original either, but there are a ton more laughs and cute character moments in those to make things well worth it. I might be alone here, but I would happily swap this episode for another if I could. Number 2 best, Agony of a Witch. Yeah, pretty much. Agony of a Witch, Agony of a Human, Agony of a Fanbase. You could probably just change the title to Agony and it would be a lot more fitting. I mean, holy cow! Talk about bumming out your fan base for a whole week! I mean, it wasn't nearly as bad as Empire Strikes Back or Infinity War, where we had to wait over a year for closure, but still, not fun! Zero fun! Negative fun! Honestly though, this whole thing is pretty much a compliment, because the fact that I was this upset just means that the writers did their job really well. They made us care about these characters beforehand in previous episodes, and then packed the story with so many powerful emotional beats that I was desperate to see things resolved by the end. And while yeah, the season finale is a little too crammed and rushed for my liking, this episode is just beautiful. The first half offers an intriguing and heartwarming balance of lore and character. On the lore side, we get more info on King Belos and exactly what his motives are, cleverly shown through the means of a museum tour. Apparently magic and its wielders were wild and crazy back in the day, using their powers however they pleased, whenever they pleased. But then old Goldmember showed up and showed everyone the proper way to use magic, which apparently ushered in a magic renaissance of sorts. Or at least, that's what he wants you to believe. You gotta remember, the winners write the history books, and hidden behind this utopian veil is a creepy, controlling, and pretty menacing tyrant who's a lot more than meets the eye. And while the full extent of his power is shown in part 2, they still do a good job of showing how ruthless this guy is. Not only by having him crack open a magical companion with the boys, but also through some clever imagery. We were shown a mural during the museum tour of Belos apparently bringing about peace and harmony to the Isles, but after Belos threatens Lilith and reminds her of what happens to covenless witches, we're shown the same mural again, but this time with screams of terror in the background. And looking closely at these people, yeah, you can interpret a few things from this. Sure, they look happy with smiles on their faces and everything, but it could also look like they're cringing in fear, terrified of this guy who's gonna kill them if they don't play by his rules. It's pretty symbolic of how this guy's motives, as well as his face, are hidden behind a mask, one that only our protagonists are coming close to cracking. And of course, on the character side, we have wholesome Ida Mom and wholesome Luce Baby being wholesome, and I love it! They really do drive home the amount of impact that Luce has had on Ida's life, watching her learn and grow and change for the better, while at the same time Ida also grew and changed for the better, a lot of which we were there to witness. She used to use her magic for petty schemes and selfish pursuits, and now she has a more selfless reason to use it, and I think that's wonderful. They even have her look at an old picture of an event that we never saw in any of the episodes, which implies that they've been through even more than what was just shown on screen. I'm usually not a fan of off-screen development, especially when people use it as an excuse for why characters change, but here I think it works for a simple, charming recollection, and I kinda wish we would have seen more than just one picture. Also, this is by far Luce's best appearance in the series so far. Her primary motivation here is not some kind of silly power fantasy or desire to be a hero, it's to heal her caretaker of an affliction that's been hurting her for years. She's much more focused and takes things seriously when necessary, but we also see how much of a sweetie she is, giving Ida hugs and little medical tips. She's always had a good heart as shown in many episodes, but this is where I think she shines the brightest. And do I even need to mention the last 5 minutes? I don't think so, it's just wonderful. The fight between Ida and Lilith has all the best parts of the one in convention, but just on super steroids. Excellent back and forth choreography, banter that is full of sick burns, constant tension with Luce's bubble flying in and out of danger, and Ida just out for blood. Like, she doesn't even bother with pre-fight formalities. The second she shows up, she starts an all-out magical assault on the monster that took her child. It's both heartwarming and epic, and once again perfectly shows the dynamic between Lilith's magical style and Ida's magical style. Ida keeps on fighting until the curse is about to consume her, but right before it does, she delivers this beautiful speech, just thanking Luz for being in her life. She feels like most of her life up to this point has been a waste, but Luz helped to give her life major purpose again. She's not just some gray-haired outlaw anymore, she matters to someone who cares about her a lot. Just... my heart in pieces, on the ground, that's all. And then by the end, all we get is an aura of gloom and uncertainty. Luz slowly foots it to the owl house. King asks what happened to Ida, and Luz just breaks down and cries, unable to even muster an answer yet. Even the end credits just shows an ominous shot of the Emperor's palace with no music. Now's not the time for smiley happy prancing through Magic World, no. This is a seriously dangerous situation. It's like the credits at the end of Star Crushed from Star Versus, giving space and silence to let emotions sink in before the episode eventually fades out. Powerful stuff. This episode may have been painful to watch, but for all the right reasons. I hated seeing characters I loved going through this, and it only made the following episode where they made it out okay so much sweeter. I can only hope that after this two-part finale, things will only continue to look up for the show. Number 1 worst, a lying witch and a warden. Alright, I feel like I need to explain myself for this one, because I got a fair amount of backlash back when I critiqued this episode in my first Owl House video. Do I have a problem at all with Luz being a more down-to-earth and relatable kind of weirdo? Of course not. When I brought up examples of weirdos I like, I wasn't saying that was the only kind of way to be weird. I get that most people are actually very subtle about their odd tendencies, and I think that's great. Not every weirdo has to dress up like a clown either. I was just saying that in the realm of animation, you can do a lot of telling with some visual shorthand, like character design. My main problem with Pilot Luz, and pretty much the entire pilot in general, was that everything felt extremely artificial. The moral, the story, the dialogue, all of it just felt bare bones and forced. And after having watched the entirety of the first Owl House season multiple times, and knowing how amazing it gets, this pilot actually feels even worse than it did before. Let's start with Luz, and remember, everything I say about her here is exclusive to the pilot. She got better with time, and I really like her now, alright? Alright. Now from the second episode onward, Luz's character arc is very straightforward and understandable. She needs to get her head out of those fantasy books and pay attention to more important things. But when you look at the storytelling and framing of the pilot, it looks like they're trying to do the opposite. They keep trying to make Luz super sympathetic, like she's in the right and the people just don't understand that her weirdness is a good thing. And to be fair, weirdness is a good thing, but not to the extent that Luz has. Her weird tendencies are an active disturbance to everyone around her, literally causing people to scream and run away. And yet this episode keeps implying that that's okay, and that Luz shouldn't be put down for this. She's just weird and people should accept that, and I don't buy it. The entire point of the series as a whole is to show the importance of balance, showing that an even mix of conformity and individuality is the right way to go, and leaning too far to one extreme is unhealthy and dangerous. Heck, just look at Ida and Lilith for examples of that. So in the pilot, which is supposed to set the stage for the entire series, having us root for someone whose individuality is clearly too far in the red just doesn't make any sense. Seriously, she was gonna set off fireworks in the school, and we're supposed to be on her side here? Also, I really wish the episode would have done a lot more showing than telling. Aside from the school shenanigans, which again really muddled the message, we're mostly just shown through really clunky dialogue how weird of a person Luz is instead of being shown organically. Perfect example. There's a scene where Luz talks about how she likes editing anime clips to music and reading fantasy books with convoluted backstories. Coming out of a character's mouth, that sounds extremely awkward. So instead of just straight up saying it, show a scene of her packing in her room to go to camp. Maybe she's watching one of her own sad AMVs on her computer to match her mood. We'd be able to see both her room and her computer desktop. Two ways of subtly showing what she's like. You could even make her online handle the Good Witch Lazura if you want. There's so much you could have done here. But nope, line about being a weirdo here, line about having weird stuff but never showing it here, clunky reading of her character description here, and we're good. But by far the worst of this whole thing is just how determined the pilot is to shove the message of "it's good to be weird" down everyone's throats. Tons of clunky dialogue about how being weird is so amazing. Super on-the-nose conflict where basic everyday weirdos are locked up in cages because they dare to be different. Oh. And of course a big dramatic speech where Luz stands aloft her mighty staff and says how important it is to be weird and how everyone should accept the weirdos for who they are. Yeah, not only does this feel extremely forced, but when you factor in that it's being said by a girl who definitely needs to dial her own weirdness back a little bit, like I already said, it kind of shoots the whole message in the foot. Yeah, it's good to be weird, but when you present Pilot Luz as the poster child for that moral, it makes all the stuff she did before seem justified, and it clearly isn't. Seriously, you know your big soapbox speech is a misstep when literal soap commercials did a better job at presenting their messages than you did. In a world where pilots are supposed to present the themes, characters, and tone of the rest of the series to get people interested, this one falls extremely flat. Heck, I don't even think the creators like this episode that much. The Conformatorium is only mentioned in passing for the rest of the series, and the only other time that Warden Wrath shows up is in the last episode, and he's quickly tossed aside by Luz like a piece of old sandwich. It seems like they did all they could to distance themselves from this episode, and I don't blame them. But if I can be positive for a second, this is as bad as the series gets. It never stoops this low again, meaning everything after the pilot was uphill. And honestly, I'd rather the show trip over the starting line and then sprint a full mile, rather than get winded halfway through and then give up. So yeah, still don't like this one, but at least everything that followed was much better. And the #1 best episode of the Owl House Season 1 is Enchanting Gromfright. I've said it many times in the past, but it bears repeating. I can always respect and appreciate good world building, continuity, lore, and drama. It takes a lot of effort to craft a world and a story that stay consistent and interesting across multiple adventures, and it's one of the key factors of immersion for a lot of people. But honestly, none of those things would matter much at all if we didn't care about the characters involved. The characters are the driving force that entice me to watch and remember a story for years. The #1 thing I'll mention when I talk about my favorite shows and movies of all time. While the world and the fights and all that stuff are just extra icing on the cake. Good looking and good tasting icing, but icing nonetheless. And I think that's the main reason that Enchanting Gromfright deserves to be at the top of this list. I know a lot of people enjoyed this episode mainly because of the gay, and yeah, I completely got swept up in the gay as well. It was freaking adorable in all capital letters. But even when you wipe away all that off the surface, there is so much more meat to chew on. At its core, this episode is basically a big victory lap that reminds us of all the character relationships and arcs that have been building up before this point. A celebration of how far we've come, and how far we still have to go. All wrapped up in a massive, precious, adorable bow of cuteness and charm. Not the perfect episode, but pretty dang close. First off, when I say that all the relationships and arcs are given homage, I really do mean all of them. They let us know how much of a mommy gene Ida has developed by showing an interesting progression of emotions from her. She starts off as her normal, joking self, laughing off Luz's sentiment and pretty much telling her straight out that taking Amity's place is a really stupid idea. But as Luz gets more and more serious, we start to see bits of worry and overprotective anger in her demeanor, getting more strict with telling Luz not to do this. I especially love this subtle change of expression from angry to concerned. Like, oh man, this kid is really serious about this. Her heart's in the right place, but I can't let her get hurt. And if my assumptions are correct, those letters that we see at the end of the episode are probably her doing as well. Phrases like, let's do all kinds of fun mother/daughter activities forever and ever, that 100% sounds like something Ida would write if she tried to sound like Luz. Combining all of these things together just shows how much Ida cares about Luz, being concerned for her safety and even caring about the things she cares about. I know I've been talking a lot about motherly Ida on this list, but it's just an adorable dynamic. She'll have a world's best mom mug before you know it. Then there's Luz's conflict about communicating with her mom. I pretty much predicted that her ultimate fear was going to be facing her mom and having to tell her about what she did. But even if it was expected, the execution here is just superb. We see Luz in panic mode as her greatest worry comes to life in front of her. Grom morphs into a more monstrous form as Luz's fear slowly eats away at her. The poor girl gets hammered with emotion after emotion that she fears her mom will go through if she finds out. Fear, confusion, anger, sadness, one after another. And by the end, she doesn't even want to look at the monster anymore, showing how afraid she is to face her actual mother. Like, holy cow, give this child a hug, a cookie, and a can of Coke, please! But by the end, we see the gradual beginnings of Luce's willingness to communicate with her mom and be more open about things. No longer just sending nondescript emojis as responses, and instead telling her outright that one day she'll tell her everything that's been going on. And maybe she can even meet her new friends. And as she says this, the clouds move away from the moon, showing that a little bit of light is starting to peek through the darkness, some confidence budding from her fear, and I think that's amazing. It's kind of sad that this 22-minute episode could use emojis as an effective plot device, but a high-budget film centered on them couldn't even come close. What kind of world are we living in? Oh yeah, that kind. Even the tiny moments in this episode do a lot for me. Willow easily making corsages for the students with her plant magic, showing how confident and popular she's become. King helping Ida put her outfit together and sleeping on her lap at the end, showing that they'll always be buddies. King and Gus emceeing the fight and also having a little bonding moment in private, building on their new friendship which started in really small problems. There's just so much good here, it's hard to keep track. And yeah, let's talk about what you were all waiting for, the Lumity stuff. Oh my gosh, these two are freaking precious, precious, precious. Not only is their dynamic of the happy, sunny, clingy girl and the shy, reserved girl adorable to watch on screen, but like all good relationships, they both succeed at making each other better. I love what I've been seeing between these two so far. I'll admit that I jumped the gun a little bit when I declared Lumity confirmed in my reaction, because, you know, Luce hasn't even reciprocated yet, so at the moment it's more like just Mitty confirmed. But if they do end up getting together at some point, it seems like they'd really be able to keep each other centered. Luce's free spirit and Amity's more grounded realism would unite together and keep things balanced among the two. It seems like a good platform for a relationship to me. I've got a full video in the works where I look at the intricacies of Lumity, but if it wasn't clear already, yeah, I'm not just boarding this ship. I'm getting the deluxe vacation package. Sure, it's $100 extra, but I'm worth it, dang it. And of course, the amazing dance scene between these two was just gorgeous to watch, and makes me smile even wider than I already was. I actually heard some people even putting different music to this scene, to show how well it works with everything. So, how much would you hate me if I did this? Some may just see Enchanted Grom Fright as a basic prom episode and nothing else, but I see it as a fun reminder of what this show does best, making good characters. And when you combine the continued building of relationships with great animation, atmosphere, comedy, and action, you get a definite night to remember. Call it fluff, call it cheesy, call it shipping bait and nothing else, I honestly don't care what you call it. All I know is that I'm calling it my favorite episode of Season 1. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Tell me your favorite episodes of Season 1, and subscribe for more Owl House and cartoon content coming at ya. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I hope to see you all real soon.